Shalom and good day, everyone. This is one of the videos I know y'all been waiting for, dealing with those who are studying the Most High Calendar based on Genesis 1:14. For through His living word and through the prophets, we learned that the calendar is made up of three lights, as just as the Godhead work together as one or on one team. So does the lights that our Father made in heaven. The three work together as one, giving us one calendar. And the three lights I'm talking about are the sun, the moon, and Mazzaroth. And Mazzaroth is a Hebrew word for the star constellations or the 12 signs. Today, the Gentile call it the zodiac. So what you see before you is a picture of the moon. Okay, and I really like this picture because it really captures the moon's light, and this is what this video is dealing with. It's dealing with the update because we're in First Enoch's writings in chapter 70. I believe it's 73. But when we get to the notes, we'll see where we really at. But we was in that chapter, and in that chapter, it's revealing unto us some calculations that has to be done to understand the moon light portions that she receives from the sun. Okay. Also, let me do my usual greeting as well. I also give honors to our Father in heaven, Yahuwah, for He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I also give honors to His Son, Yahusha HaMashiach, for He is the Son of God. He is the Messiah slash Anointed One. He is the second Adam. Okay. He is the door slash the left, and He is the fountain of the living waters. Iron, iron. I also give honors to our mother in heaven. Yes, we do have a mother in heaven. For the Messiah says that wisdom is justified by her children, meaning that she is not made in vain. She shall birth or bring forth the children of the light. This is what makes you a friend of the Most High Yah. Also, I like to bid a shalom unto the bride of the Messiah, to the 144,000, and to the nation of Israel. So take this time now to pause your screen. I mean, this is, like I said, this is a great picture to give you about the moonlight, because the question you ask yourself, how does she does? You know, how does she goes to a sliver of light to being the brightest light in the night to being no light upon her. And those understandings are given through the Father's prophet. Okay. Remember what the Messiah say unto us? We have the prophets of Yah. So before you start running to other books and to people, whether they are Israelites and Gentile, you first need to run to his prophets, because you know the prophets are the most high mouthpiece. All those sacred things and secrets and mysteries are given unto the prophets, his servants. Okay. So before we begin, let us get this out the way. So the title of this lesson is The Update of First Enoch chapter 73, part 4. This is an update to part 4, y'all, dealing with the moon portions of light. Okay. So any copyright material I share with you is for edification purposes. Before I forget, I do want to show you a picture of this, because you know the one of the most high sacred numbers unto him is the number 7. On the channel, it does talk about the mystery of 7. But even in this lesson today, you're gonna see the theme of 7 being expressed. And within that theme, it's going to lead us to looking at the multiples of 7, or the multiplications of 7. Now, this picture only ought to go up to 12, but as we study this moonlight portion, you're going to see 7 being expressed in this. Okay, just as when we study his calendar, you will see 7 expressed in his sacred calendar as well. Okay. Now let us begin. Let's go to the nitty gritty. Let me get this display right. There we go. So let us pick up, well, not where we left off. Let me go back to what we need to review. Okay. So what the Most High revealed unto us as we study this chapter, y'all. Oh, and I do want to pause here. This is the correct phases or the correct order of the phases. I know the Gentiles started with the dark moon, but our Father is the Father of lights, Israelites and Gentiles. And you will learn through his prophets that the beginning of the month starts with a sliver of light. Okay, let us know that's the beginning. And the mid part of the month is signified with a full moon, when the moon is full of light. And then the end of the month is represented by no light upon the moon. This is why you cannot see her in the heavens. Again, these things are given unto the prophets. So take this time now to pause the screen to look at the correct order of the moon phases. And that's why I have this title as the Hebrew moon phases. So for those who've been following along, we have been reviewing First Enoch chapter 73. And when you especially get down to verse 6, 7, and 8, that's when things get a little bit more, how can I say, challenging. Challenging. Because you're probably saying, what in the world is Enoch saying unto us? When we look at verse 6, 7, and 8. For as when I was reviewing with y'all about 2 weeks ago, um, we were on to something. Now, the information I share to you is not to be put away, but it was leading into the direction that we should go. So as I was meditating, the Father told me to go back, to go back. So that's what I did. I went back, and he said to understand 6, 7, and 8, as well as the other verses in chapter 73, we have to look at First Enoch chapter 78. First Enoch chapter 78, okay? So starting with verse 5, the chart that I had given unto you is based on what I knew or based on what I learned from reading verses 1 through 5. Okay, so I'm going to leave this chart as is, because as we progress to verse 6, 7, and 8, I'm telling y'all it's going to be changed. It was another part to this that needed to be added. Okay, but what I want to point out to you, notice how when the moon is increasing in light, each day more light is added to her, right? Notice how we see the multiplication of 7 being expressed. Okay. Now, when you do your fractions, because we're looking at parts over whole, because we see the moon as a circle, a disc, a sphere, a pie, right? And we were trying to get an idea of the measurement of her light, we have to put it in a fraction form to see it. For we learned that the moon gets her light from the sun, and the sun give her a seventh portion. Do y'all hear that? Number 7 being expressed. A seventh portion, which is represented by 1 over 7. 1/7. Okay. So she take that light from the sun and she chops it up. In other words, she don't take all of it to be shown in the heaven immediately. No, she does it in measurements. Okay, and I hope you understand what I'm saying. So when you look at this chart with the phases of the moon, the beginning of the month is signified with a silver crescent. And that light of the moon, y'all, is so small, so narrow. The best time to see it is in the west and when the sun has went down. Okay, that is the best time to see her. Okay, so what she does each day, she increases in light, working herself up to the half moon, and then from that day she continues to increase in light, working herself up to the full moon. And once she becomes a full moon, she does the opposite. She decreases herself in light, working herself down to a half moon. And then that point, she works herself down to a moon with no light upon her. Forgive me, my mind went blank. But notice that this is in the multiples of 7. The multiples of 7, for example, we know that one of the days for the moon to become full, it takes her what 14 days. And we know the number 14 is a multiple of 7. A multiple of 7. So for example, when you see 2 times 7, we get 14 because what we're adding 7 to itself. 7 plus 7 2 times is 14. Just like 7 plus 7 plus 7 3 times is 21, and etc. So we're adding 7 to itself. Okay. So when we do the fraction, when we're doing parts of a whole, we learn that the slices of the pie, or the total slices in the pie, are 14. 14. So when we do our fractions, which are parts of a whole, this is how I was able to get 1/14. 1/14, which is very important. You're going to see why this is all important. So my new moon day is represented by 1/14. Okay. Now, when I simplify these fractions, it's going to help us see the bigger picture. Remember, I said it moves in what? Sevenths. Sevenths. For example, when you simplify the fraction of 2/14, you get 1/7. Do y'all see that? So 1/14 is here. Then it increases on the second day to 2/14. And when I simplify that fraction, I see 1/7. And you continue to do the same until you get to day 14. But notice what take place. On the second day, 1/7. Then it increases to 2/17. Do y'all see that? Let me type it out so you can see what I'm talking about. This is very important, but before we proceed, we're looking at First Enoch chapter 78, verse 68. Before we go there, this is very important to master or to understand, okay? Because this chart that I'm showing you is not the complete. It's not all completed because it's lacking something, and it's lacking a very important detail that is revealed in First Enoch chapter 78, verse 68. Okay. But when I say in 2/7, another way to look at this, I'm gonna try to let me try to come down some so you can see this. And let me come in the center. Another way to look at this, 2/7 can be expressed by 1/7 plus 1/7. So we're adding 1/7 to itself 2 times. This is very important to get down, okay? And you'll see why as we go through the next following verses. But notice here it's working itself up from 1/7, 2/7, 3/7, 4/7, 5/7, 6/7 until we get what? 7/7, which represent a whole moon. A whole moon. All right. Now that we got that part out the way, let us begin. Okay. So to understand the next following verses below, verse 6 through 8, we have to look at First Enoch chapter 78, verse 68. And that reminds me, I need to bring up this book. I have to bring it up. Because that's another thing I learned. When you read Enoch's writings, it helps to see all the verses together. Because in the notes, y'all see, I separate the verses and I add detail under them. But when you are studying Enoch's writings, it helps to see all the verses together in the flow. Okay, so let's bring this up. Okay, now that we have that up, let's begin. First Enoch chapter 78, verse 6. And when the moon rises, 1/14 part appears in the heaven. And on the 14th day, the moonlight becomes full. All right. So as we talked about this before in the previous class, the 1/14 part represent your new moon crescent, your first day of the moon or the first day of the month. Okay. This is very important because this is going to help you to do this chart that I have established correctly. You got to have that information. Then it goes on to say that on the 14th day, that's when the moon becomes full of light, as we see expressed in this picture. You see how bright it is. Okay? She's full of light. There's no darkness upon her. You can see her fully as a circle, as a disc, as a sphere. Okay? So this is very important. But looking at this verse, and this is not the only verse, because we could also look at verse 5 in First Enoch chapter 73. The thing that I was missing is that, well, not missing, but not seeing that the denominator for the fractions above should be 14. 14. Because when I read First Enoch chapter 78, verse 6, and leading down, you'll see why. Your denominator, this is the bottom number of your fraction. Okay, the bottom number. Remember, the top number is your numerator, what we learned in math, and your bottom number is the denominator. Okay, the denominator represents the wholeness of the item that you're talking about. The numerator represents the part of the item that you're talking about. Remember, parts over whole. When I looked at First Enoch chapter 76, chapter 78, verse 6, that's what I saw. Then when he told me to go back, he said, go back. And I said, you're right. My denominator doesn't change. That was the part that I needed to really understand what this is saying. So my first day is represented, y'all, by the 1/14 part. The 1/14 part. And when you're dealing with a full moon on the 14th day, my denominator should still be 14. And you'll see why this is so important. Because when we go on to read verse 78, I'm going to read that to you now. When we go on to read on to verse 78, verse 7, it says, in addition to that, so in addition to that verse above, that 15 parts of light are transferred to her until the 15th day. When her light is full, according to the sign of the year, and she becomes 15 parts, and the moon grows by an additional 14 parts. Okay, so this is in addition to verse 6. Okay, it's adding some more information, but it's telling us dealing with this with a certain time when this take place. Because not every month is the same. Some months the moon is full on the 15th day. Some months she is full on the 14th day. Okay, but especially according to the sign of the year, which I'm not going to review in this video. We're going to review until we get to 78. But in that time of that year, the moon will be full on the 15th day. Okay, but to understand verse 78, you're going to have to read verse 8. That's what I'm saying, y'all. These are not the type of verses that you could just take and just slice this apart. You have to do it by precept upon precept and line upon line. That's how you have to do this. So when we get to verse 8, it's in addition to what? Verse 6 and 7. So in addition to verse 6 and 7, it goes on to say, as the moon waning decreases, that means she's going to decrease in light on the first day to 14 parts of light, to 14 parts of her light. That's very important. It said her light. Remember our units. It's dealing with the unit of the moon light. So after she become full, the next following day, which is the first day, she becomes 14 parts of her light. Then on the second to 13 parts of light, on the third to 12, on the fourth to 11, on the fifth to 10, on the sixth to 9, on the seventh to 8, on the 8th to 7, on the ninth to 6, and on the 10th to 5, on the 11th to 4, on the 12th to 3, on the 13th to 2, and on the 14th to the half of a seventh. Remember, a 7 is represented by 1/7. So to the half of a seventh. And all her remaining light disappears wholly on the 15th. Okay, this is the 15th day that follows after the full moon day, which is the full moon day is on day 15. And we'll see it in the chart. Okay, so let's go back to the notes. So we learned from verse 6. This is the confirmation. Your denominator, your fraction, okay? In your fraction, your denominator will always be 14. Again, we're dealing with divisions. We're dealing with multiples of 7. Multiples of 7. So when we look at verse 78, verse 7, y'all know me, I boldface, I underline, I highlight, I see a lot of key words here. Okay, so let's break this down in 7. So we learn from verse 7 that 15 parts of light means that she receives light for 15 days, and that amount of light she received are 15 parts now. 15 parts. Okay? This is why that verse it says she becomes 15 parts. 15 parts of what? 15 parts of her moonlight. Of her moonlight. Remember, she takes the light from the sun and she's going to chop it up. And each day she grows, okay, from that light she had received from the sun that she chopped up. So she take up the chopped up pieces and she added it to herself each day that goes by. This is why, in addition to that verse, it says that the moon grows by an additional 14 parts. Notice that the number 14 ends with TH, and notice that the word parts end with S. It's the reason why it said and, because we know and is like close to A, okay? Because this word has a vowel beginning, so they put and. But if it didn't have a vowel beginning, it was saying a 14 parts. But instead, it's using grammar. It's saying an additional 14 parts. And we're going to see what that means. Okay? Now, to understand what do the 15 parts equal as far as the amount of the moonlight, we have to see the chart. I'll put my units in. Last time when we discussed this is kind of getting on it. So I'm not going to read this statement here because I'll probably have to update it. But we're going to go down to the chart and you'll see why. Okay. So all the way at verse 78 to 8 to you. So now let us look at the chart and break this down. Okay. So the chart is dealing with the parts and portions, the parts/portions of the moonlight for 15 days. Okay. I need to let me make a correction here. Now, in order for me to really understand what these verses were saying, y'all, I had to work it backwards. Let me tell you why. I had to start with 78 verse 8 because that's the easiest. It's giving me detail. Also, what I knew, what I'm saying, also what I knew that the first day of the moon was 114. Remember, I told y'all that would not change. So I went ahead and plugged that fraction in 114. And I'm going ahead and boldface this. And I'm going to highlight that cell block. That's very important. That would not change. And you'll see why it's very important to plug that number in. So I'm going to highlight that whole cell block to one because that 114 will not change. Will not change. So the day one of your moon, the first day, for the first part of that moonlight, y'all, it's going to be 114. You're going to see why. So when you look at verse 78, these are the days that follow after the moon is full on the 15th day. So in the verses above, we learn in verse 7, on the 15th day, the moon is 15 parts. That's another key fact. We're going to boldface that. Okay? We're going to boldface it and we're going to underline it, letting us know that it's a key fact. Okay? So that's another important piece of information. Okay? So following after the 15th day, okay, the moon is what, 15 parts. It's giving us the parts that will come after it. Okay? So in verse 8, it says the first day. And the first day is the 16th day of the moon. This is the day that followed after your full moon day, which is what? What is your full moon day? The 15th. The 15th. Let me go back up so you can see it, so you can follow along. Unfortunately, I can't put these charts beside each other. You can really see it. See right here? The 15th. The 15th. So my 16th day of the moon is the first day. And according to verse 8, it says that on the first day, which is the 16th day, y'all, the moon light is 14 parts. The moon light is 14 parts. Very important. You're going to see why. And as we march this all the way out, it goes back to the notes. So the first day is 14 parts. And I'm going to boldface all of these because these are numbers that would not change. Okay. Boldface it. And let me underline it. Underline all these numbers. We're going to boldface it. And we're going to underline it, letting us know this is a solid fact. Okay. A solid fact. Let us know that this is not going to change based on these verses here. All right. Now that we did that, so day 1 of the moon, because she's decreasing in light now, she go down to 14 parts. Day 2, 13 parts. Day 3 to 12 parts. Day 4 to 11 parts. Day 5 to 10 parts. Day 6 to 9 parts. And day 7 to 8 parts. Day 8 to 7 parts. Day 9 to 6 parts. Day 10 to 5 parts. Day 11 to 4 parts. Day 12 to 3 parts. And day 2 to 2 parts. And when we get to, to day 13 to 2 parts, forgive me, to day 14 to a half of a 7-part. I know I put a decimal number there, but I want you to get the habit of focus on this fraction, because you're not going to see it unless you look at the fraction form. The half of a 7-part. In the prior videos, we did the math on this, and we know of means to multiply. So if I take 1/2 times 1/7, that's a 7-part. Notice what I get here, 1/14. 1/14. This is very important for you to know. We're going to both face it, and we're going to underline, because that's letting us know it's not going to change. It's not going to change. Okay? And then from day 15, which is what, the last day in the moon's month, because you know some of her months can be 30 days, it'll be 0. 0 parts of the moonlight, as we seen expressed in 1 Enoch chapter 78, verse 8. Now you're going to see why all this is important. Okay? Because verse 8 give us a solid piece of information so we can see how this figure out. Okay? So it said on the 14th day, the light becomes half of a 7th. And then on the 15th day, all her light disappeared. There's no light upon the moon. And when there's no light upon her, y'all, you won't be able to see her in the heavens. Right now, you can see her when she's full, or when there's light upon her. But when there's no light upon her, you cannot see her. Okay? Now that we have this information, now I can break this stuff down. I had to work backwards, y'all, to really see what 1 Enoch chapter 73, verse 6, 7, and 8 is telling us. So now let's break this down. Now that we have this secure information, with my chart, I have my moon phases listed on chart. Then I have the days of the moon as my first row. Then I have the number of the days, because in order to see verse 8, it helps me not to get my numbers mixed up. So my numbers of the days began from the first day, ending on the 15th day. Then I start to do some math. I have a row to show you how much light she decreases by per day. You know, the difference. Then I have the sum of the parts. Then I have the parts of the moonlight. 1 Enoch chapter 78, verse 8. That's what we just went over. Okay. And then I begin to work my fractions. What do I tell y'all? The denominator, let me put my cursor up here so you can see it. The denominator right here, do y'all see that? Ends in 14, or is 14. 14, that's very important. So all my fractions I know that follows before this should have a denominator of 14. That's very important. Also, another important information that verse 8 give us, that it says that the 13th day is 2 parts. And you're going to see why this is very important to know. So what 2 parts of what? Here's the mystery. When we look at the 14th day, it's giving you the parts of the moonlight, which is what? 1/14. 1/14. So 2 parts is actually 2 of 1/14. 2 of 1/14. Let me type it here so you can see it. 2 of 1/14. There we go. 2 parts. Let me take the highlight out. Okay, so 2 parts are represented as 1/14 plus 1/14. I don't know why that did that. Probably I hit a key by mistake. And what happens when you add? Remember, the only way for us to add, your denominator must be the same. So when I add 1/14 to 1/14, I would get 2/14. 2/14. Okay. Now we still got to do an extra step because you're probably wondering why I have 3/14 listed under number 2. This is why. According to the verse in verse 8, it says that the light is a half of the 7 part. So when I convert it into a decimal number, half, I'm looking like half of a part or half of a 7 part. That's how I should say it. Half of a 7 part is represented by what? 0.5. 0.5. Okay? But remember I told you, as the moon increasing in light, we have to show the total amount. The total amount. Okay? For example, on day 1, she's 1/14. She's 1/14. Okay? Now when we get day 2, not only she's 1/14, but we have to add an additional 2 parts. An additional 2 parts. And 2 parts, I'm going to put this under here, is represented by 2/14. 2/14. Okay? Remember, she's increasing in light. So we're adding 2/14. 2/14. So 1/14 plus 2/14 will give me 3/14. So we're increasing in light. We're increasing in light. Okay? So we're adding the parts to itself. Okay? On the first day, she's half of a part. Then on the second day, it's an addition to adding to half of a part to 2 parts. So in this column here, I need to add a row so you can see this. Let me add a row. And we look at the parts. Okay? Gonna merge it. All right. This is very important to know. A part equals 1/14. 1/14 of moon's light. Very important to know. Okay? Because we got to do some math here, as you seeing. And because I know a part equals to 1/14, for example, we know 2 parts equals 1/14 plus 1/14, which equals 2/14. Okay? But remember, she's increasing the light. So because she's increasing in light, how to figure out your moonlight for that day? Is this on day 2. The moonlight would be 2/14 because she's what? 2 parts. 2 parts is added to that. See? 2 parts is added to that. Plus the 1 part, which is the 1/14, which equals 3/14. Now you can see how I got these numbers. Okay? Take this time now to pause your screen. Okay? I want you to meditate on what I say. So we're adding, as each day go by, we have to add the additional parts as each day go by. Okay? Now we see why the new moon day is represented by 1/14. 1/14. You got to have that right. If not, then when we get to day 2, your total amount of moonlight will not equal to 3/14. Okay? So by knowing this information, I work it all the way, down, because now I understand what are the 14 parts. The 14 parts are 15/14. I know you probably say, "Oh wow, huh? I thought it'd be 14/14." Because remember, she's increasing in light. She's increasing in light. That's what verse 8 is going to show you. That was the part of information that I was missing. Okay? But when we look at the additions per day, on day 2, she has an addition of 2/14. On day 3, let's do another one so you can see how this will work. On day 3, not day 3, on day 12, y'all, she is 3/14. 3/14. Meaning that she becomes 3 parts on that day. In addition to the 1/14. So I add 1/14 to 3/14. I get 4/14. And you're probably saying, how is this possible? That's one way to do it. Like I said, if math is many ways to do something, but you still get the same answer. Another way is looking at the difference between day 13 and day 12. So when we look at day 12 and 13, the moon is decreasing in light. So how much does she decrease down to? What is the difference between these parts here? What is the difference between part 3 and part 2? Well, we have to do what? Subtraction. So 3 minus 2 equals 1. 1. So she decreases by 1 part. She decreases by 1 part. So when I go from day 13 to day 12, because remember, I'm working backwards now. Because I know she decreases by 1 part, I would add 1 to 2/14, like 1 over 1. 1 over 14. And this is how I get 3/14. 3/14. But I still remember I have to include this part here. So to help you see this better, let's go to the beginning of the month, because when you work backwards, ain't gonna lie, sometimes you can't really see it, right? But I want to show you what I got on day 16 would be the same on day 14 of the moon, for when the moon is what? Full of light on the 15th day. So now that I know this piece of information, by me working these numbers backwards, I know I should have the same in the beginning. So let's go there now to help you see this. Oh, Father's telling me I can do this way to make it simple for y'all. So let me take this out, because I don't want this to be confusing. Thank you, Father, for that. Another way to do this, 2 parts, right? Convert this whole number 2 parts to what? 2/14. 2/14 add to 1/14, I get 3/15. Now, the difference between 3 and 2 is 1. So all I would do, increase my numerator by 1. So difference between 3 and 2 is 1. I would go from 3/14 to 4/14. Same thing, the difference between 4 and 3 is 1. Go, and then I would add it to this, which make it 5/14. 1/14 plus 4/14 is 5/14. And I would keep doing the same thing until I get to what? Day 13. Not day 13. Day 17. On the day 17, the difference between day 17 to day 16. Oh, let me hold off on that. Let me do day 18, because we got to go the other way so you can see what I'm saying. The difference between day 18 to day 17 is 1, right? So when I do that, add 1 to 13, well, 1/14 to 13 to 13/14 parts, I get 14 over 14. So now let's go to the beginning so you can see this, because I'm telling you, work backwards. It can be kind of confusing. So by knowing that information, by working the number backwards, I was able to plug in the correct numbers from the beginning. Like I said before, we know this part here, your first day has to be 1/14. And 1/14 is what? Half of 1/7. Half of 1/7. That's very important to know, y'all. Very important to know. Okay? So when we convert the 1/14, it's represented by the decimal number of 0.5, which means a half. A half. So when we get on the second day of the moon increases by 2 parts. In other words, an additional 2 parts is added to the first part here. The first part. Okay? And that first part is 114. 114. That's what part 1 is represented by. 114. So let me take this part out so that part won't be confusing. Okay? So I'm going to put in the notes, FYI. For some reason my computer don't want to cooperate with me today. First part is represented by 114, which equals to half, 1/2 of 1/7 part. Okay? That's very important to know. So that's why you see me writing in this row here, sum of parts. I started off with 0.5 to represent that the 0.5 means it's a half of 1/7. A half 1/7. That's what the first part is equal to right here. So in that row right here, I got parts of the moonlight, 1 through 15. There's 15 parts, right? This is what we know from based on those verses. But the first part of the moonlight is represented by 114. 114. Okay? So when we get to 2 parts, we increase in what? We increase it in light. She is now 2 parts. And we learn from the verses above that 2 parts is 2/14. 2/14. So 2/14 plus 1/14, and this is how I get 3/14. Okay? 3/14. Because we have to add. Remember, she's increasing in light. And I will put this in parentheses on the chart so you can remember, so you can see how did I get 3. So you can see how I got 3/14. And by knowing this, this is how I was able to get the other numbers. Okay? So I add 1/14 to 2/14, I get 3/14. Okay? When you break this down, you will learn like to simplify the fraction because you're going to see this terminology. To break down 3/14, it becomes 1/7 part and 1/14 part. Another way to say this, 1/7 part and a half. 1/7 part and a half. And I'm going to put that so you can see it. Let me decrease my font because you're going to see that terminology again. 1/7 part and a half. You're going to see that terminology again. Okay? Again, 114 in the decimal form can be represented by 0.5. It's a half of 1/7. 114, remember, is a half of 1/7. I'm going to put that down here. Let me decrease my font. A half of 1/7. That's very important to know. By knowing this, I'm now able to plug in my numbers. For example, when we get to 3 parts, the difference between 2 and 3 is what? 1. 1. Okay? So that's how I get 4 14ths. And I will continue to do this until I get to 13. Difference between 12 and 13 is 1. So when I add that part to 13 over 14, I get 14 over 14. 14 over 14. Now, this is where this other piece of information come in. I knew that my numerator, not numerator, my denominator cannot change. It will remain 14. But she's still increasing in light. And how I get 14 and a half, it comes from another verse. So we're just going to take this as is until we get to that verse. Okay? This is what I say about precept upon precept and line upon line. The 14 and a half comes from another verse to give you that insight. But even if I didn't have that verse, as I continue to work these numbers, as I continue to add 1/14 to each part, when I add 1/14 to 14 over 14, I get 15 14s. 15 14s. And when I simplify that fraction, this is what it's going to show. It's going to show 1 whole pi and 1/14 part, which is another way to say this is which is what 14 parts and a half. 14 and a half parts. Another way to say this is 7 over 7 and 14 parts. 7 over 7 and 1/14 part, or 7 over 7 and a half part. Do y'all see that? You have to simplify these fractions so you can really see the big picture to understand those verses. So when I get to day 15, the 15th part is equivalent to or equals to 16 over 14 parts. Because when I simplify this, it says it becomes 1 whole pi and 2 14 parts. 2 14 parts. The reason why I highlight this, now we get the breakdown of the additional 14 parts. But let us keep going. To simplify this, I can put 15 parts. Or another way to write this, I can write this as 7 over 7, which represent what? A whole pi, because we operate in sevens, and 1/7 part. Because when I simplify 2 14ths, this is a fraction, we simplify, right? 2 14ths becomes 1/7. Do y'all see how you can see 7 in all of this? So the moon becomes brighter on the 15th day. And she's brighter because she has received an additional 14 parts with an S. And the additional 14 parts is 2 14ths or as 1/7. Let me bring it up so you can see it. Or as 1/7. Okay? Very important. Take this time to meditate on what I'm saying, because I'm going back to that verse. Because that verse says in Enoch in verse 7 that the moon, I'm in this verse here, y'all. No, for some reason my highlight don't want to work. Okay. There we go. It says in verse 7, not only did she become 15 parts, but in addition to that, the moon grows by an additional 14th parts with an S. What are those additional 14th parts? It's 2/14. 2/14. And because she's 2/14, it becomes 1/7. 1/7. All right. Let us keep going. I know this is something you're going to have to meditate on. So I updated the important facts. I made a little chart for that. Let me take this out now. Okay. So in the important facts chart, this is what is written. 1/7 part of sunlight is divided into 7 parts for the moonlight. Okay. When we read first Enoch chapter 74, verse 3, it says, in single 7 parts she accomplished all her light in the east, and in single 7 parts accomplished all her darkness in the west. Which makes sense when you precept those verses. She received her light in the east. Okay? She received her light from the sun in the east. And then in the west, all her light is gone in a single 7 part. And a single 7 part is represented as 1/7. 1/7 portion of the sun's light. Okay? So in the east, she becomes a full moon. And how she becomes a full moon? She becomes 1/7 portion of the sun's light. In the west, she becomes a dark moon because she loses the 7 portion of the sun's light. That's why it said, that's why it's written as this verse in a single 7 part. When you translate that these words into numbers, single means what? A 7 parts. Okay? In single 7 parts, be 1/7. 1/7. So again, the theme is expressed. I'm sorry. Once again, the theme of 7 is expressed in the moonlight as well as in the sun's light by sevens. Okay? And I underline TH to let me know when it says seventh. It also is another hint for me. It's dealing with fractions. Okay? Another thing I want to point out to you is that whatever fraction number you see for the full moon day is still going to be equivalent to 1/7 of the sun's light. 1/7 of the sun's light. This is what I want you to understand. It's still going to be equivalent to 1/7 of the sun's light. Very important to know. So whatever fraction you see, whether it's 16 over 14 or 15 over 14, and I'm going to take out these because this may be a little bit confusing to you, it still is going to yield 1/7 of the sun's light. Another way they may written it is 15 parts and 14 parts. So whether it's 15 parts or 14 parts, it still will be equivalent to 1/7 of the sun's light. 1/7 of the sun's light. Okay. Also in the chart, it is reinforcing unto you that 1/14 in regard to First Enoch chapter 73 verse 7 represents day 1 of the moon or the new moon day. When we translate that into a decimal number, it's going to be a half of 1 part of the moon's light. Okay? And that 1 part of the moon's light is 1/7. Okay, so half of 1/7. The chart also reinforces 1/7 equals, I think I need to take that out. Yeah, let me take that out so it won't be confusion. Because what the moonlight is doing, she's taking that light and she's splitting that light like almost in half. Okay, so let me take this part out so it won't be confusing. Okay, when we look at a half moon, when we do the math of that, comparing the half moon light, well, half of the moonlight, okay, to the sunlight, these are the fraction you would get. Half light of the moon is equivalent to 1/2 or 7/14 or 7 portions out of what? The 14 parts. Okay? Remember, our unit is moonlight. When we compare it to the sun, it's a half of the 1/7 part of the sun's light. Now, I will put in parentheses for moonlight is represented by what? 14 parts. So that way you can see what I'm talking about. And it's expressed in this fraction, 7/14. If I simplify 7/14, it becomes 1/2 because 7 can divide in 7 one time, and 7 divided by 14 is 2. So that's how I got 1/2. Okay. Remember, the 14 parts come from I denominator. Or as the full moon, when she's full of light, slash full of light, when we compare that, she is 1/7 part of the sun's light. Remember, the sun is 7 times brighter than the moon. 7 times brighter than the moon. Now that we got that out the way, now we can proceed to First Enoch chapter 73, verse 6. So in that verse, when it says, and when she receives 1/7 parts of the half of her light amounts to 1/7 part and the half thereof. So when we read this verse, let me go before we look at the chart. I'm going to show you the detail because I had to clean all that up. We know that 1/7 part of the sunlight equals a full moon. So when we take half of the moon light, the moon receives 1/7 part of half of the moon's light. Now I know you're probably saying, what in the world that mean? Because I had to take my time and read that too, dealing with that verse. And taking half of the moon's light is dealing with this part. It's talking about she receives 1/7 part of the half of her light. So the 1/7 is taking a part of light from a half light moon, not a full moon, but a half light moon. So when we take the 1/7 part of a half light moon, when you do the math, because we know of me multiply, 1/7 of a half light moon, you're going to multiply 1/7 times 1/2, you get 1/14. For those who know about the chart or who's getting familiar with this chart, we know that a half light moon is equivalent to what? 7/14. 7/14. Okay, that was done with the chart I showed you at the beginning of the video. 7/14. a half light moon. So we take 1/7 of, when we take 1/7 times 714, you would get 114. Remember your multiplication. The seven's going to cancel itself out because seven's on bottom here and this seven's on top. So it's going to cancel out, leaving behind 1/14th part of the moon's light. Okay. Remember our unit, we're in the moon's light. And another hint, think of a pie. A whole pie is represented by 1. A half pie is represented by half. Okay. So when we interpret this or we convert these words, when we convert the moon receiving 1/7 parts of the of half of the moon's light, we would get 1/14. 1/14. I'm going to highlight that. Okay. We would get 1/14th part of the moon's light. This is very important. So let me go ahead and pull up that verse for you. So in verse 6, when I was reading it again, it was saying something else. I was saying equal to, like whatever light she gets, it'll be equal. But actually, it was saying something else. So I had to take my time. These are word problems, y'all. So after the comma, it goes on to say, the moonlight amounts to 1/7 part and the half thereof. Amount means what? The total, the sum, right? So remember I said before early in the chart, this is very important to know this. We're going to see that 1/7 part and the half thereof. Okay. I had said that in the chart. And when we look in the chart, what is the 1/7 part and the half thereof? It falls on day 2. This is how I know without a shadow of a doubt that, remember we was looking at the chart dealing with the 15th day, that the second day will be your 3/14. Your second day would be the 3/14. I'm going to highlight, well, I'm going to underline this to let you know this is solid information. Solid information. Same thing with this one. This is solid information. Solid. Okay. These are 2 guarantees right here. So you can see how I was able to get the other numbers. So on day 2 of the moon, she's going to receive what? 2 parts. And when she received 2 parts, she become a total of the 1/7 and the half part. I need to both face that to part 2. The 1/7 and a half part. This is very important for you to know. Okay. Very important. Let me just highlight it so you can see this is guaranteed information. This is information that has been locked in now, information that has been confirmed by the scriptures and by math. Now you'll see why it's so important to identify what unit we are in. The unit we are in is dealing with the moonlight now. Remember, the moon is taking her light she received from the sun and she's chopping it up. And you see, as you see here, it's not as spread as even as we think. It's taking a fraction of the moon's light, or it's taking a part of the moon's light. Okay. So this is why you see on the first day, the first part is represented by a half, a half. Okay. And I'm going to change that to number 1 so you can actually socialize what is the first part. Because as you see, these parts is not going to be equivalent to itself. These parts are not going to be equivalent to itself. So the first part is equivalent to a half. A half. Okay? Because the half represent what? The 1/7 of a half of the moon's light, which is 1/14. When we get to 2 parts, she become a total, a sum of 1/7 and a half of the moon's light, which is, when we simplify that fraction, is 3/14. 3/14. So the difference between the first part and the second part, when we converted these parts to what they represent, the first part is a half and the second part is a 2, right? 2 parts. The difference between this, the moon is increasing by light. That means adding to her light that she has now on that new moon day. She adding 1.5. 1.5 light is added to that half part. And when we add that 1.5 to the half part, she becomes 2. And the 2 is represented by 3/14. Very important to know. So when we get to day 3 of the moon, the day 3 is increasing by a part, which is represented by the decimal 1.0. So when we add 1/14 to 3/14, we get 4/14. Remember, a part is equivalent to 1/14. 1/14. And this will continue until we get to day 13. Day 13, when we add 1/14 to, follow my cursor, I'm on a day 12 of the moon. When we add 1/14 to day 13, when we add 1/14 to 13/14, we get 14/14 for day 13. But then there's a change in day 14. Instead of adding 1, we're going to add 1.5. 1.5. And the reason why we add 1.5, the difference between 13 and 14.5 is 1.5, which makes this become 15/14. 15/14. And when we convert that to a simplified fraction form, we get 1 whole pi and 1/14 part. 1 whole pi and 1/14 part. We know 1/14 is equivalent to half. Okay, half of a 7. So this is why we get 14.5. And you're going to see that number pretty soon as we go into verses. Okay, so now that completes verse 6. Verse 6. Now let's go to verse 7. Verse 7 says that the moon sets with the sun, and when the sun rises, the moon rises with him, and receives the half of 1 part of light. We ought to identify what that half and 1 part of light is. Okay, that's the 1/14. And in that night, in the beginning of her morning, in the beginning of the lunar day, the moon sets with the sun. So what is happening on the new moon day? That is the beginning of her night, which is the beginning of her morning. So she is traveling with the sun from the west to the north, and then she can be rising. And then she's heading towards the east. Okay, that's on a new moon day. Okay, so let me read this part again. In that night, in the beginning of her morning, in the beginning of the lunar day, the moon sets with the sun. So that is true. On a new moon day, she's not up for long, and she go down in the west. And the moon is invisible that night with 14 parts and a half of one of them. 14 parts and a half of one of them. This is where we get into 14.5. The 14.5. Because if we add 14.5 to 0.5, we get what? 15 parts. Now we see how all this is coming together. But I do want to emphasize. Let me read this part again. It said, in that night, in the beginning of her morning, in the beginning of the lunar day, the moon sets with the sun. So we know in the west, she is seen as a crescent moon, which is the new moon day. And then she sets down with the sun. That means she go down in the same direction on the same point, which is the west. And she cannot be seen no more through the rest of that night. That's why it says in this verse, she is invisible that night, and that she has the remaining 14 parts and a half of one of them, meaning that we only see a half part of light upon her. And that half part of light upon her that we see is the 1/14th part. So she's going to have to work herself up to 14 and a half parts. So now let's go back to the notes. Okay. So we go back to the notes. One of the things you go ahead and look at it as a part, as a slice of pie, as a slice of pie. Okay. So we already did the math before. We ought to identify that the half of one part of light. What's the half of one part of light? It is the half of the 1/7. The half of the 1/7. When we take the half of the 1/7, we get 1/14. I need to put in here moon's light. This is where verse 6, when we go back to verse 6 to make sure. Yep, this is where verse 6 would come in. Line upon line and precept upon precept. So I'm going to put in verse 6. This is the half of the 1/7. And we take the half of 1/7, we get the 1/14. And then to represent that 1/14 as a half, I just put either 0.5 or 1/2. Okay. Then that verse identify unto us that she will work herself up to 14 and a half parts. 14 and a half parts to become what? Full of light. How I know this is 14 and a half or 14.5, we have an and here. And is your decimal. Is your decimal. Okay. So on the new moon day, she is 0.5. 0.5. So she has a remainder of 14 and a half parts to work herself up to. Okay. Let's go to the chart so you can see this. So on day 1, she's a half. Part 1, the first part is equal to a half. Okay. And then she's working herself up to, this is a solid fat here, to 14 and a half or 14.5. We're going to both face that and underline it. That's a fact. Okay. Which is correct because if I add 0.5 to 14 and a half, I get what? 15 over 14. 15 over 14. So when we put that in the notes. So 0.5, which is what? Day 1, plus 14.5, which is day 14. This is when she's a full moon. Equals 15. 15 parts. Or another way of saying this, 15 over 14. 15 over 14. That's how I know that fraction is correct. And that's how I know my numerator does not change. Because we are in what? Multiples of 7. Multiples of 7. Remember your multiplication sheet. Multiples of 7. 2 times 7 equals 14. All right, let's keep going. Verse 8. So in verse 8, it goes on to say that's in addition to 6, 7, and 8. I mean, that's in addition to, all these verses above. So in addition to 7, I'm sorry, in addition to 6 and 7, it goes on to say, the moon rises on that day with exactly a seventh part. Now I'm going to go ahead and give you a hint. We got to know what the seventh part is reference to. What unit and what part of light is it reference to? Okay. So it said, she rises on that day with exactly a seventh part. It's going to be exactly a seventh part, y'all. And the moon comes out and recedes from the rising of the sun, meaning that she's not going to no longer be traveling with the sun. She's going to push herself away from the sun. Because why? She's working herself to become a full moon. And for those who read Enoch's writings, you will learn that when she works herself to become a full moon, she's going to be opposite of the sun, meaning that she's going to rise in the east as the sun goes down in the west. Okay? So she's going to come out and she's going to push herself from the rising of the sun. Okay? And in her remaining days, so in her days as she's working herself up to that bright light, in her remaining days, she becomes bright in the remaining 13 parts. Okay? So when we look at the chart here, the seventh part is dealing with your first new moon day. Because remember, on that day, it is the seventh part of the half of the moon's light. Remember, I told y'all you got to pay attention to the terms, and that was expressed. And let me see here. Let me see which verse. I got to remember which verse that we saw this in. Right here. It's identified in verse 6. It said, when she received 1/7 part. And if this verse say that she's going to rise on that day, exactly a 7 part. See? Verse 6. Verse 6. It says, when she received 1/7 part of the half of her life. So the 1/7 part in verse 8 is verse 6. I'll put it as bold so you can see here. The 7th part. It's another way of saying it. Another way is the 7th part of the half of the moon's light. Okay? This is the 7th part. So when she rises exactly the 7th part of what? The 7th part of the half of the moon's light. And I need to put in here verse 6. You can see that. Okay? This is the 7th part that it's talking about. So when she rises with exactly the 7th part, in the remaining of her 13 days, she is working to become full of light. So when we do our math, now we can tell by the way this is written, this is based on the moon becoming full for 14 days, right? So we have a total of 14 days. The simple way to do this is we know our first day is done with the new moon. So if we take away that day, how many days we have left? Then with verse 8, we have 13 parts remaining. So when we take away the new moon day, we have 13 days remaining. So for example, day 2 of the moon is 1, 3 is 2, 4 is 3, 5 is 4, and we continue. The 14th day would be the 13th. The 13th. So as that verse is written, it says, and in the moon remaining days, so the days that she has left to become bright in the remaining 13 parts. And that is correct. Okay. Y'all, this was some math upon math. Was not easy. I'm gonna be honest. This is all I found this to be very challenging. Very challenging. Okay. I see my 114. Yeah, that's just the way to write that. Another way to write the 14 and a half can be this. 7 over 7. Remember, we're working in the number of 7, and 114. Okay. Or we can say 7.5 because we're taking halves. Okay. Well, let me make a correction. No, I can't say 7.5. But anyway, if I take half of 14.5, it's 7.25. I'm just trying to think of another way to write this. But it's like one whole pie and a half, because the 114 is the 7th part of the half of the moon's light. Okay. So I just put down a note. Full moon equals 1/7 portions of the sunlight. Half of the moon's light is equal to 7 portions of 14. Okay, is equal to 7 portions of 14. I should put it like this. It's equal to, so this won't be confusing, 7 over 14. 7 over 14. Or half. Okay. Remember, I denominator is 14. And the sun is equal to 7 portions of light, because the sun is what? Sevenfold, or 7 times brighter than the moon. And that's what we learn from all these chapters. First Enoch chapters 72, 73. I know we had also went in some of 74 and 78, some of 78 as well. So now you see why we have to do line upon line and precept upon precept. I hope y'all enjoy this. Like I said, this is no joke. I found this to be challenging because it was like math within math. A unit, you have to separate your units, and even with the moonlight as being the unit, you have to look at what part of it. Are we dealing with a full moonlight, or are we dealing with half of the moon's light? So it was a challenge, but I love the challenge. I liked it. But what I found was that we have to what's the word here? We have to seek out Yahuwah. And that's what I did. I said, Father, I know something's missing here. I can't put my finger on it. What is it? What is it? Okay. And that's what he told me. He said, go back to 78. Go back to 78. And he was right. And that's what helped me to see it, to bring all these pieces of the puzzle together. I'm just underlining this, letting you know what is a solid fact. So to understand, what is your 14 parts? And I'm going to have to change this one right here. Thank you, Father. Your 14 parts, when you convert it, is or when you see what it is represented by. The 14 parts is represented by 14.5, which is 15 over 14. And when you convert that, it's one whole pi and 1/14 because it's starting all over again. And the reason why I say it's starting all over again, right here, sevens. When you get to the 13th day of the moon and you convert the 13 parts, it's 14 over 14. And when you simplify that to see 7 in it, it's 7 over 7. So when we get to the 14th day, it's 7 over 7 and 1/14. You can just see 7 being marched around in this. How the moon is working her stuff up. Okay? This is dealing with the moonlight, not dealing with the comparison of the moonlight to the sunlight. Because when we compare the fullness of her light, it'll be 1/7 of the sun light. So those are the two things you have to separate. Okay? We also learned that the first part of the moon is represented or equals to the half, which is the seventh part, or another way of saying this, the seventh part of half the moon's light. Okay. Another thing we learned, we would look at day 2. This is where we have a change. Day 2 gives like a little extra portion, right? So she could become 2 parts. And when she become 2 parts, because she's increases by 1.5 part, remember we're adding 2, it is represented by the fraction of 3/14 now. 3/14. Okay. And when we convert that or put it in another language, it is saying the 1/7.5. And the 1/7 part and a half is also represented by 1/14. As it's another way of saying it, but it all still equal the same. There we go. But the following days after, you see it increase by a part, and by a part that it increases to is 1/14. 1/14. Let me put this down here. A part is equal to 1/14. Okay. I'm just pausing and see if anything else I need to mention. But remember this, we're getting the sum of the moonlight. So what she gained here is going to be carried over to the next day. And then etc. Okay. All right. Hope y'all enjoy this. Make sure the people receive salvation as written in Romans chapter 10. Make sure the people are baptized in the name of Yahusha HaMashiach, for the Lamb set the example of the water baptism and the Holy Spirit baptism. And he made this real simple for us, y'all. This is why he's called the second Adam. He set the example for us to follow. So if you have no one to baptize you, you can do it yourself. Exercise your faith with words. For the water is the second witness in the earth, and the heavens and the earth are his witness. As far as the Holy Spirit baptism, the Father made that simple too. You don't have to go to man for this. For the Father say, all you have to do is ask in the name of Yahusha HaMashiach, and I will give it unto you, according to your heart, faith, and works. For I have met people who have received the Holy Spirit baptism, and believe me, they didn't all get it in a church building or in a church assembly, okay? Or in the bride's assembly, however you want to say it, or in a synagogue. You have to understand the Father, y'all. You got to start putting him in a box. He can give you the Holy Spirit or merge you in the Holy Spirit at any place and any time because he can do all. He can do the impossible. Hope you enjoyed this lesson. And for those who want to join us to learn about the Father's calendar, you can call 919-972-8970. And the contact information is also listed in the video description box. Shalom.